Contracted Lyme for certain. Could have had it for years, like many of us have probably been aware of, but for certain, in May of 2011, on a backpacking trip with my then 18-year-old son. And I was taking him for a graduation present skydiving for high school graduation, and then we went down to Mammoth Cave National Park to do an overnight backpacking trip. I woke up the first morning with more than 20 deer tick nymphs attached from my waist down between my toes. I know it's not a pretty thing to think about. I had been a backpacker for a quarter of a century by that point. I thought I knew the facts about Lyme, and like so many of us, I found out how many of those facts were incorrect, inaccurate. The number one of which helped lead to my infection was this myth that a tick's got to be attached for 24 to 36 to 48 magic hours, you choose, to transmit the bacteria. So I got all those ticks off, I thought, within 10, 12 hours, because we had just come in the night before, and I never even thought about going to the doctor. Never even thought about saving one of those ticks, speciating them. I'm almost certain that the majority of them were deer tick nymphs. I knew enough about the species at that time, and they are in Kentucky, as opposed to what public health authorities still continue to claim, that it's not an issue in the southeastern United States or the Midwest or the Southwest. We all know it's an issue everywhere.
Or Sacramento.
Or Sacramento.
Yeah. Not Sacramento.
I'm riding through Sacramento Tuesday. So long story short, I was actually doing, later that summer, about 6 to 8 weeks later, I was doing the P90X fitness routine, which included power yoga.
I know that.
And that's when I first started to notice some strange symptoms that at first I sloughed off to just sore joints from working out very hard. And I was a competitive cyclist at the time. Later that fall, it progressed, classic. I started going to my physical therapist thinking I'd thrown something out of whack in my body. And you and I were talking, my physical therapist, I give him such great credit, was actually the first medical professional that pointed me in the direction of Lyme. After 2 weeks of working on me and making no progress, he'd work on every joint, and 12 hours later it would be all the same as it was before. He said to me, Logan, many times I've had patients that didn't respond to treatment that used to work for them, because I'd been a patient of his for about 5 years. And we found an underlying condition later on. And he started listing them: lupus, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue. The fourth one he said was Lyme disease. Finally, the light bulb went on for me. This was like early September after the May tick bites, late May. And I hearkened back to those tick bites, started to do my research. And long story short, after about 5 months, I finally got a clinical diagnosis because I got referred to an LLMD through a now friend I met on LymeNet.org, who happened to be the co-founder of our local support group. And they had actually just started meeting the month before I got diagnosed. I was in active treatment for the better part of a year for Lyme and Bartonella. I chose the classic antibiotics. In hindsight, I might choose something different, but I did make progress. But the key for me was mold, biotoxin illness. I plateaued with the antibiotic treatment for the Lyme and Bartonella. Luckily, my LLMD was a lifelong learner. She'd become a naturopath as well as an MD, and she went and studied with Dr. Richie Shoemaker. And my last appointment with her, when I was just like stuck, I wasn't getting any better, she said, let's test you for biotoxin illness, for the halotype that supposedly as much as a quarter of the U.S. population may be genetically predisposed to not be able to detox mold toxins properly. They just build up in your body. Sure enough, I came back positive for that. When she started me on cholestyramine,
That's what I'm supposed to
which is
That's on
pretty
my
innocuous. I didn't have any problem with it. It's a powder that you can mix with water. I took it 4 times a day. Within 3 weeks of adding that to my protocol, I didn't tell her at the time, but I actually stopped all my antibiotics before I started the cholestyramine. I wanted a break. Many of us have done that, probably take a drug holiday, and I'd been on for 7 months, 4 different orals. I took a break and just did the cholestyramine, and within 3 weeks, it was like somebody had lifted a lead blanket off of me, and the fatigue peeled away. I got a lot of my physical health back that summer of 2012. And it was a couple of months later, I got back into bicycling. I was able to get active again, but I still wasn't right cognitively. And I knew that, and I was struggling to do my job at the Red Cross. I was the Chief Development Officer for the Kentucky and Southern Indiana region of the American Red Cross. I made the crazy decision to some people that I was going to quit my job, sell my home, and go hike the Appalachian Trail and try to raise awareness for Lyme disease. For some reason, the question came to me of, what did I get my physical health back for, but I'm still dealing with some of this. What do I do with this gift? If I'm lucky enough to be able to get up and do something I love, hike again, can I do that and do something constructive? Because I cannot walk away from the story that I've learned about Lyme in this country, in the world. And it's obviously been a passion for me since I started that Appalachian Trail hike in July of 2013. I spent 5 months hiking the Appalachian Trail, doing videos, trying just to share fact-based information that if I had been straight, maybe I would have avoided having acute and then persistent Lyme if I had understood it. But to also demonstrate to people we can move through this. There is no perfect recipe for any one of us, but in community, and that's how I met Dorothy. Today's the first day I've got to give Dorothy a hug. But I reached out to Dorothy via email when I decided I was going to do this. I was going to quit my job and sell my home, most of my possessions. And I contacted her, and she referred me to a friend of hers at Insect Shield, who outfitted me in tick-protected clothing for the AT. And I shared before I started my talk here that in 5 months on the AT, I never had to pull a single tick even crawling on me, because I'm convinced because of that tick-protected clothing. And increased and more accurate knowledge of how to keep yourself safe from ticks. So unfortunately, at the end of that Appalachian Trail hike, I contracted Giardia, probably from bad water and it was probably my own fault. But my immune system, like many of ours, was still not firing on all cylinders. And I tried antibiotics to clear it, and it didn't work. And most of 2014, I was sick with Giardia and other gastrointestinal stuff. But while I was recuperating, I started hatching this idea that if I can get back again one more time, then I'm going to try to go across the country and continue this work. So I started in Delaware on April the 18th at the Atlantic Ocean, and I backpacked from Delaware back to Louisville, Kentucky, my hometown. When we got there, we realized I didn't have enough time.
How long did that take you?
That took me 72 days, about 1,100 miles, and I actually got off in southern Indiana. So when I go home in about a week from tomorrow, I've got 50 more miles to bike from southern Indiana back to Louisville. I got to knit the two ends of the country together. But I realized I couldn't, walking, get across the mountains before the snows hit, so made the decision to switch over to a bike because I wanted to do this in one continuous and not lose momentum. So I've been doing a lot of the same things I did on the AT, doing lots of videos, some of which are just fun travelogue videos that I hope get shared with folks that may not be able to do this right now, but it can lift your day up a little bit to know that you can do it. Keep that vision alive. If you were a hiker, a backpacker, a cyclist, people do move through this illness, and no two people are going to do it the same way. And don't measure yourself by someone else, but don't give up. I find it no coincidence whatsoever that I was descending down Lizard Head Pass in Colorado about 4 weeks ago, and coming up the other direction, I see this cyclist, and turned out it was a 72-year-old man who met me, and we all stopped and talked. He was leading a tandem pair of cyclists, a man and a woman, in their 40s. She was the executive director of a homeless shelter in Utah, and they were riding cross country to raise awareness for homelessness. And we, had this wonderful cyclist visitation on the side of this mountain, because there's so few of us out there. And she gives me a bracelet that she gives out to every person she met going across the country. And I stuffed it in my back pocket because it was starting to rain, and I didn't want to hold them up, and I wanted to get off this mountain before it got too slippery. That night when I pull out the bracelet, what it was a little metallic emblem that says, "Never give up." And that happens to be the motto of the lady that founded our Lyme support group, Pam, who helped me find my LLMD and then helped me find my way to that support group. Never give up. And that, to me, is a big part of the message of what I call the Trek for Truth. So when I thought about this morning, something positive and uplifting I could share with you guys that means something to me, I thought about a man by the name of Dr. Bruce Lipton. Anybody ever heard of Dr. Lipton? You have? He's a Californian, or at least he spent a long part of his professional career in California. He was a biology teacher and professor at Stanford for a period of time. He wrote a book called The Biology of Belief. And there's a wonderful lecture on our website, trekfortruth.org, and it's FOR, Trek, T-R-E-K, for truth.org. Under the Health tab, it's about an hour-long lecture by Dr. Lipton. And Dr. Lipton is an expert in something called epigenetics. Anybody ever heard of epigenetics? Which means above genetics. And he's a classically trained biologist, but his career, what he's found through his research, and he's not alone, this is an emerging field, and you're going to hear that phrase more and more as the years go by, epigenetics. And what he's basically teaching through his own research and his own validation in the laboratory is there's a far greater impact on our health and well-being from what goes on in here and in here than what goes on through our genetic profile. He uses the analogy that genetics are like a blueprint. And just because you hold a blueprint in your hand does not mean that's the way your house is going to be built. If you follow the blueprint, yes, but you can change that blueprint anytime. You can erase, you can redraw. And he said, you know, the research is showing consistently that when you take into consideration your mental attitude, your spiritual attitude, going beyond biochemistry, there's a substantial level of reality beneath that. Something that biochemistry emerges out. It's electromagnetic. You can talk about Chinese medicine. You can talk about the power of prayer. But there's a deep, deep power in the mystery of the human heart and the human psyche that each one of us can bring into play during our recovery. I'm doing a complete injustice trying to explain his research. You'd be much better off to watch this lecture, and I guarantee you, if you're having a bad day, you're having a rough day, the symptoms are flaring, you're feeling like you're up against the wall and you're not making any progress, turn on that lecture, because this is a man that speaks science, but he lives from his heart. And he demonstrates through his own presence and his being. And I was lucky enough to go to Palm Springs, California, well before I got Lyme, and got to see him at a conference present. That's the kind of information, science, but more than science, that's out there that I think can be a part of each one of our healing paths. Above and beyond the specific treatments that you're doing and the substances, you know, those are all obviously really, really important, but there's a deeper layer of something going on here. So if you get a chance, go visit our website and give that lecture a look. I think you'll be glad you did. You'll probably run out and buy the book. And he's written a couple since then, and he's still lecturing, and he will definitely put a smile on your face. He looks like a little cherub. Rosy cheeks, always a big smile, but he's brilliant, just absolutely brilliant. It's called The Biology of Belief. And I do think that was a part of my healing process, was this mystery of the human spirit. And that's been a part of what I've been trying to communicate through videos and through this adventure. You know, it doesn't make a lot of rational sense for a man in his 50s to get rid of all of his worldly possessions and his source of income and go vagabond across. Although it was a lot of fun, it has been a lot of fun. It's scary and it's unsettling, but it's also deeply enriching, you know, to get to meet people like you and all the folks I've met across the country, going from Maine down to Georgia and now Delaware across to California. What I shared with Scott and Caroline, that the greatest takeaway I'll take from both of these adventures is the restored faith in human nature and the spirit of people, that people are good, no doubt about it. Some people have that goodness buried a little deeper than others, but most of us want to help each other. We want to be in community. And I challenge each one of us to spend a little time thinking about at least a little bit of a silver lining in the Lyme experience. Because I know I'm a different person. I'm grateful for the healing that I've experienced, And I wish that for each and every one of you guys. But I know I'm a different person